All right, hello everyone. Hope you're doing well out there. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We focus on great theories of everything, try to take deep dives into them and kind of figure out how to use them in your own life, in particular to work on your paradigm shifting and your awakening to 5D consciousness. The formation of a holistic worldview. And today is our 530th video on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And Mr. Larson was an American engineer. He lived from 1898 until 1990. Around 1930, he had some epiphanies about how the universe operated. He developed those ideas through a process of induction and kept his day job and just kind of worked on this methodically over the course of many years. And in 1959, he articulated his two fundamental postulates about how he believed the universe operated. The first postulate, which is the main original postulate, and that was that the universe is composed entirely of one component. Now, that is, most scientists will say composed of matter, composed of energy. But in Larson's case, the universe was composed entirely of motion. The universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. Hence the name the reciprocal system, or also known as the universe of motion. Now, when Larson refers to motion, originally he actually used the term space-time, and then he changed it to motion. But toward the end of his life, he began to kind of see it just as change in 3 dimensions. So that's what we have, a universe of change. Harking a little bit to the Taoist, the I Ching, the Book of Changes, and transformations. And for Larson, when he did refer to motion, he did refer to it as a more generalized kind of motion that he called scalar motion. A scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no specific direction. So you can envision a scalar motion as with a balloon that you put dots on with a magic marker. If you blow up the balloon, you'll see that all the dots will be moving away from each other. Every dot will be moving away from every other dot. So there is no specific direction. It's really either in or out. If you contract the balloon, all the dots will be moving toward each other. If you expand the balloon, all of them will be moving away from each other. These are, and really what you're seeing is, not the motion of any individual particles, or dots. It's really the motion is kind of coming from inside. It's the actual space itself that is expanding or contracting, or it's the surface of the balloon itself that's expanding or contracting. So it's really like an emanating internal motion. And Larson refers to that outward motion as the progression, the inward motion as gravitation. And he pays great attention to the reference system. So that the reference system is where you get the directions from. You're not able to ascertain any direction other than in or out with those dots until you arbitrarily choose one dot and say, this one I'm going to arbitrarily say is motionless. Then when you do that, then you can start to impute directions to all the other dots. All the other dots will will appear as if they're moving toward or away from that one stationary dot. And but that direction is not part of the motion itself. It is part of the reference system. So the reference system is what carries the direction. And everything is, all of the dots are following their own course. Each dot is moving in its own, under its own auspices. But it appears as if there's a force field. It appears as if they're all being attracted to that center, that stationary dot. But that is not the case. So Larson refers to that as an as-if force. It looks and mathematically behaves just as if there's a force there, but there isn't. That is due to the reference system. Okay, now, so now the second postulate Larson uses just to basically plug the first postulate into. The universe conforms to the relations of the ordinary commutative mathematics. Its primary magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. So he uses these basic rules in order to take that first postulate and from the two deduce a theoretical universe about how the universe would operate if Larson's system was correct. And then he compares his theoretical universe with the experimental universe of modern science, and does that in many books. We've gone over quite a few of them on this channel. I don't know that any other channel is really covering the reciprocal system in any type of depth at all. Certainly not like this channel is. And, it's so, this is your one-stop shop for reciprocal system here. Also, ancient Egyptian tree of life. And we'll be getting into quite a few other subjects here in the near future. But we are now looking at how Larson has plugged this reciprocal system into his economic theory. We've looked at some physics and some astrophysics, and we've looked at some chemistry. We've looked at some metaphysics, religion, and philosophy, biology, psychology. Some of his colleagues have also plugged the reciprocal system into, conspiracy theory and geology and ancient history, also, broader cosmology and meteorology. But Larson has two books on economics. One of them is more like microeconomics, The Road to Full Employment. This one that we're looking at today is called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. And we're about to start chapter 5 of this book, Concepts and Definitions. If you want to get into discussion of the reciprocal system, we want to check out one of my earlier videos on the subject, probably the first 474. Almost all of those contain at least a fairly lengthy explanation of the reciprocal system. For today's purposes, we're going to get into the text and hope that you can follow along, maybe if you have some background information, or if you watch these videos from the start of this book. In chapter 5, he's just looking at concepts and definitions. So he's going to outline some of his basic concepts of his reciprocal system of economics. While we will be dealing largely with aspects of the subject matter generally included in economics that are different from those covered in the literature of the economic profession, the subject matter itself is the same. It will therefore be convenient to use the names and definitions that the economists apply to the various economic concepts, insofar as we will utilize these concepts without significant changes. The term goods has already been introduced. It is defined as follows. Goods are those things that satisfy economic wants, directly or indirectly, through participation in the production of other goods. The economist's definition of goods, which has been adapted for the purpose of this analysis, is considerably broader than the ordinary usage, which makes goods synonymous with commodities. Under this definition, intangibles such as services are also goods, as is anything else, whatever its nature, that satisfies some kind of an economic want. The limiting adjective economic is a somewhat unconventional addition to the definition of goods, but this work will lay considerable stress on the point that items which cannot be bought and sold are outside the sphere of economics. The word goods carries no implication of social desirability when used in its economic sense. It is rather unfortunate that the economic profession has adopted this particular term in preference to some one of the other words that would have been equally available, as the use of this terminology leaves the door open to confusion between the moral and sociological conception of goods good as socially desirable, and the economic conception of a good as something that satisfies a want. It should be emphasized that from the economic standpoint, all economic wants are alike. The opiates of the drug addict are goods to economics equally with the family bread and butter. The bombs and shells that destroy life and property are economic goods, even though their purpose is to do harm. This does not mean that economic science approves of these things that are condemned by the ethicists. It neither approves or disapproves of anything, any more than physical science would contend that the diamond is too hard or that water boils at too low a temperature. Utilities are those characteristics of goods which enable them to satisfy human wants, directly or indirectly, by participating in the production of other goods. This concept of utility, or economic usefulness, as here defined, is an objective property, that is, one which has an actual existence independent of an individual's mental processes. It exists whether he realizes it or not. Subjective concepts, those that exist only in the mind of the individual, are usually influenced by the objective. If they are independent of objective influence, we usually suspect that there is something wrong with the mind, but they are not necessarily controlled by the objective. Utility, as here defined, is not influenced by subjective opinion. except in special cases, such as the administration of medicine, where the efficacy of the treatment depends to some extent on patient's mental attitude. The tomato had a utility as a food even in the days when it was considered poisonous. Anthracite coal had utility before anyone ever discovered that it would burn. Furthermore, goods often satisfy physical needs of which the individual is ignorant. It is only within comparatively recent years that the utility of certain foods in furnishing the vitamins necessary for health has been recognized. Citrus fruits and other natural sources of vitamin C were performing their useful function of preventing scurvy and satisfying the want for health for thousands of years before their true utility was discovered. The inherent utility of any good is, however, only a potential utility. In order to determine its actual utility, we need to take into account not only the potential utility, but also the relation of this potential utility to the wants of individuals. Bananas, ripening in Costa Rica, have potential utility to the inhabitants of Alaska, but no actual utility as long as they remain in Costa Rica. Ice has a potential utility for cooling purposes, but an inch-thick coating on the river in midwinter has no actual utility of this kind. In general, the actual utility of an economic good depends not only on its inherent characteristics, but also on the time and place at which it is available. And a very large part of man's economic effort is expended in converting potential utility to actual utility by getting goods to the right place at the right time. For convenience, it has become customary to speak of the inherent utility of goods at their original point of production as form utility, and to consider that additional time and place utilities are added as the goods are transported or stored. This is a useful concept, and the same practice will be followed in this work, but it should be realized that this is a purely artificial division for analytical purposes, and does not mean that a certain portion of the total utility is due to time, another to form, and so on. What we call the creation of place utility is in reality the transformation of an already existing potential utility into actual utility by moving goods from one location to another, where they are better able to satisfy wants. Many goods are produced at the time and place of use, and in such cases the actual utility cannot be broken down into form, time, and place components. But the same goods may be produced in an appropriate place and transported to the location where they are to be used, and then kept in storage until they are needed. In this case, the actual utility is the same as in the first example, but for analytical purposes, we say that time and place utility have been created in the processes of transportation and storage. And only the remainder of the utility can be characterized as the form utility produced in the original act of production. Time, place, and form utility are not different kinds of utility. They represent the same kind of final utility converted from the potential to the actual state by different processes. Production is the creation of utilities. This is another extremely broad definition. In ordinary usage, the term production is restricted to primary processes such as manufacture or agriculture, But from the standpoint of economic life, in general, there is no difference between such activities and any other exertion of effort toward the satisfaction of wants. A gradual widening of the concept of production has been a notable feature of the history of economic thought. The first tendency was to consider only the activities directly connected with the creation of form utility as productive, and from the viewpoint of Karl Marx and other early economists, a large part of the population was engaged in unproductive work. Obviously, this put the theorist in a rather awkward dilemma. Most of these presumably non-productive operations were admittedly necessary, so the economists could neither advocate their abolition nor justify their existence. The development of the concepts of time and place utility was a big step toward resolving this difficulty, and it is now recognized that the railroad which transports the goods and the merchant who keeps them in stock until they are needed are producers in just as true a sense as the manufacturer who fabricates them originally. The concept of services as goods has also been a gradual development. Many modern economists are still having difficulty with certain features of present-day economic life, particularly the activities connected with advertising and selling. Here again, a broader understanding of the underlying situation is necessary in order to enable visualizing these activities in their true light. The fact that income accrues to an individual from his activities does not necessarily indicate that there has been production. Theft, for example, involves effort and it yields income to the thief, but this is not production. It does not create any utilities. It merely diverts them from one owner to another. Production, as herein defined, is measured in terms of the values created, not the amount of effort expended or the individual income generated. Consumption is the utilization of utilities for the satisfaction of wants, or for operations incidental thereto. Consumption is the reciprocal of production. Okay, so there we're having kind of the key point, the key place where Larson is plugging in his theory. Where he has his universe of motion. In the universe of motion, the reciprocal time is the reciprocal of space. And everything in Larson's system, all of our scientific entities, such as matter and energy and force and acceleration and pressure, these are all fractions with space or time as the numerator and time or space as the denominator, with the caveat that space and time can be in multiple exponents. You can have space to the first, second, third, or more powers, and so on. And so here, after kind of trying to strip everything down from, what is, kind of what he talks about in the first chapter, the Robinson Crusoe situation, where you're dealing with economics in isolation, where you're stripping it down to the most basic level. What you end up getting, as far as Larson is concerned, is you get, the two most basic aspects of economics are consumption and production, or I would say production and consumption. And here he says consumption is the reciprocal of production. So this is very much like space and time. Or at least that's what I think. Maybe that's wrong. But, when I see him using the term reciprocal, I see him as pointing at something fundamental. And he's already stated that consumption and production are kind of the key aspects of economics, along with the iron law of economics, which is that work or starve. You either work and produce something, or you starve. Okay, so consumption is the reciprocal of production. Production creates, consumption destroys. In production, effort is expended. In consumption, the results of effort are enjoyed. The definition as given excludes these uses of goods which involve transformation rather than destruction of the utilities. This point will be elaborated later. Utilities are often destroyed by agencies other than consumption during use. A warehouse may be destroyed by fire, or an earthquake may raze the whole city. Conversely, utilities may occasionally be created by purely fortuitous circumstances. So far as the operation of the economy is concerned, this unintentional creation and destruction of utilities has the same effect as if it were intentional. And since these incidental gains or losses are, at least to some degree, an unavoidable accompaniment of economic life, they will be treated for purposes of this analysis as an incidental part of the primary process. The definition of consumption has been phrased accordingly. If insects get into the flour in the consumer's bin so that it has to be discarded, the effect on the economic mechanism is exactly the same as if the flour had been consumed, and we will therefore treat it as consumption. If the insects made their inroads earlier in the wheat before milling, or in the flour before it reached the consumer, the spoilage is simply another of the costs of production, and it will be so treated herein. Labor is human effort devoted to production. Here again, it will be convenient to use the bread definition of the economist rather than the broad definition of the economists rather than the narrow popular usage which equates labor with manual work. Under this inclusive definition, the efforts of managers, professional people, artists, entertainers, government officials, and all others who work in any productive activity constitute labor. From the standpoint of economic science, one type of productive effort is the same as another. The familiar distinction between blue-collar and white-collar work is social and political, not economic. Wages are the compensation received for labor. In following the development of thought in the subsequent pages, it will be essential to keep in mind that this definition of wages is coextensive with the definition of labor given in the preceding paragraph. All payments for productive effort are alike from the overall standpoint, economic standpoint, and introducing definitions based on social or technological criteria simply confuses the economic picture. There are significant differences in the basis of payment, to be sure, but in this work we will view the level of wages in terms of wage costs per unit of product, and on this basis it is immaterial whether the payments are made at hourly rates, as salaries, as fixed fees, as fringe benefits, or in any other manner. Productivity or productive efficiency is the relation of the amount of values produced to the amount of labor or its equivalent that is expended. To initiate an economic transaction, the producer or owner of goods offers to sell them at what we may call a seller's price, which he sets at or above the value to him as a seller. This is the asking price of the organized exchanges. An individual or agent of a group of individuals who is interested in the goods, either for consumption or for resale, then makes a counteroffer, a buyer's price, at or below the value to him as a buyer. This is the bid price of the organized exchanges. A process of bargaining then follows, terminating with an agreement on a sale price, or in the event of an impasse, without a sale. In some of the modern economies, many of the sellers' prices, particularly in the retail stores, are fixed and not subject to bargaining. But in this case, if the fixed price is above the buyer's value, the goods are not sold. The seller is then compelled to reduce his price to some lower level at which the consumers are willing to buy. This accomplishes the same result as bargaining in a different manner. In the subsequent pages, the term price, when used without qualification, will refer to the sale price. On the foregoing basis, okay, I guess we're going to stop right there and get into the remainder of the definitions tomorrow when we resume. And as we move through Chapter 5, and hopefully you'll tune in and visit me again tomorrow. In the meantime, thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.